Welcome to Native America Calling. I'm Andy Murphy in for Sean Spruce. The Alutiiq Museum in Kodiak, Alaska is telling the story of 11 children taken from the area and shipped off to the Carlisl Indian boarding school more than a century ago. The museum was instrumental in securing the return of one of those children who was buried on school grounds. It's part of an ongoing effort by the museum to document and repatriate Alaska Native ancestors under the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act. We'll hear about their work coming up after the news.
This is National Native News. I'm Jill Freitas. The U.S. Supreme Court upheld the Indian Child Welfare Act in 2023, according to reporting by SCOTUS blog, affirming the law's role in keeping Native children connected to their families and tribes. But nearly 2 years later, implementation challenges remain. Legal analysis from Cornell Law School says states are still working to fully carry out ICWA's requirements, and according to the National Indian Child Welfare Association, tribal leaders say the law is critical to protecting Native children and preserving cultural identity, and are calling for stronger enforcement nationwide. In the U.S. Supreme Court showdown over the 14th Amendment last week, justices sharply questioned the Trump administration's lawyer for invoking Native American history to challenge the birthright citizenship of immigrants. KMBA's Rhonda McBride reports on why his arguments faced resistance.
In defending President Trump's executive order against birthright citizenship, Solicitor John Sauer compared Indian tribes to foreign governments. He argued the U.S. Constitution treats tribes as sovereign nations, and that when the country was founded, tribal members and their children were not considered citizens, much like the children of foreign diplomats, a standard that he says should be applied to immigrants.
You're using some pretty obscure sources to get to this concept.
Justice Sonia Sotomayor challenged Sauer's reasoning.
The Indian tribes were analogized to foreign diplomats. So what do we do with that?
I'd say two things. First, as the Indian tribes, we think that's a case that strongly supports us.
But Bob Anderson, an Indian law professor at Harvard, says that comparison just doesn't hold.
And they were really stretching to make it apply, and I think they failed.
Anderson says those doubts raised about Sauer's case appear to cut across ideological lines.
It seemed to me that the conservative members of the court recognized that. I was surprised that they seemed to be so much in alignment with the opponents of the Trump administration.
Justice Neil Gorsuch, a widely regarded expert on Indian law, pressed Sauer on Native American citizenship.
Do you think they're birthright citizens?
No, I think the clear understanding that everybody agrees in the congressional debates is that the children of tribal Indians are not birthright citizens.
I understand that's what they said.
Justice Gorsuch eventually got Sauer to agree that by today's standards, tribal Indians are birthright citizens. But then Sauer walked that back.
Not sure. I have to think that through.
So based on the Trump solicitor's arguments, should Native Americans worry about their citizenship status? Anderson says,
no, there's no way that this case could affect the citizenship of Indian tribes because Congress passed a separate law in 1924, automatically making all tribal members in the United States citizens.
The 1924 law passed decades after the 14th Amendment to close the loophole that had left Native Americans without automatic citizenship. The law, though, did not affect their tribal government-to-government status under the Constitution. In Anchorage, I'm Rhonda McBride.
Leaders from tribal colleges and universities are calling on Congress to increase federal funding, saying current support falls short of what's needed. The American Indian Higher Education Consortium says tribal colleges receive significantly less funding per student than other public institutions, despite serving communities with higher financial need. AIAGC President and CEO Anna Wake Rose says, quote, a flourishing tribal higher education sector strengthens the entire nation. Leaders are urging lawmakers to fully fund tribal college programs, saying the federal government has a trust responsibility to support Native education. I'm Jill Freitas.
National Native News is produced by Koahnic Broadcast Corporation with funding by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting.
Support by the Gathering of Nations Powwow. The last dance is this April 24th and 25th at Expo, New Mexico. See the outgoing of current Miss Indian World, Dani Awawasuk, Saturday, April 25th. Tickets at gatheringofnations.com and at the gates. Tribal Development Partners believe strong infrastructure strengthens tribal sovereignty. Through the 105L lease program, TDP helps align federal funding systems with long-term tribal priorities. More at tribaldevpartners.com. Proud to support this show.
Native Voice One, the Native American Radio Network.
This is Native America Calling. I'm Andy Murphy, sitting in for Sean Spruce. The story of 11 children sent from their Alaska island homes to the Carlisl Indian boarding school is a stark example of the fears, tragedies, and sometimes inspiring reality that so many Native children faced during the boarding school era. The story of these 11 children is the focus of an exhibition that just opened at the Alutiiq Museum and Archaeological Repository called From Kodiak to Carlisle, Tracing Our Lost Students. It's part of an ongoing effort by the museum in Kodiak that involves a network of museum personnel and members of the community. We'll hear about that and about additional work in Alaska and elsewhere to adequately document the experiences of boarding school students and repatriate the relatives who never made it home. You can join our conversation by calling 1-800-996-2848. We want to say up front that we will be talking about the sometimes difficult story of Indian boarding schools today, so this might not be the best show for more sensitive listeners. Others can join in by calling 1-800-996-2848. That's 1-800-99-NATIVE. Joining us from Kodiak, Alaska is Derek Shaya. He's the Director of Language and Living Culture at the Alutiiq Museum and Archaeological Repository. He's Alutiiq and a member of the Chinook tribe of Kodiak. Welcome to Native America Calling, Derek.
Yeah, Jemai, thank you so much for having me.
So this exhibition that just opened documents the lives of 11 students from the islands around Kodiak, but this isn't the start of the museum's effort to tell this story that makes a difference in how we all regard Indian boarding schools. Where did the museum's mission start?
Yeah, so for this project and finding out more information about these students, we started this work in 2021, so coming up on 5 years ago now, where we learned of these students. Specifically, there are two girls, Anastasia Ashawak and Periscovia Abayuka, who were buried on the Carlisle school grounds, and remains were in the cemetery there. And so we, after learning about that, started to do some research into, who these girls are, and try to start doing some work with local tribes as well as family members that we identified to start working on bringing them home.
You mentioned Anastasia. What was that like for you guys to make connections with her living relations?
Yeah, that, we were fortunate that it was, relatively simple to be able to identify living relatives of Anastasia because, in 1901, they're just, and prior to that, there just weren't really great records for Alaska Native people that were kept outside of, like here in Kodiak, it was primarily the Orthodox Church that kept like baptismal records and vital statistics, even into the 1900s. So we were, and not to mention that these students who were taken, many of them were also orphans. And so that can be difficult sometimes to trace family members of orphans. And so with Anastasia, we pretty quickly recognized the last name that was reported for her as a Shawwalk, which is still a family today. And we did do some genealogical research and confirmed that she was related to that family. And so we were actually able to connect with her. So Anastasia's brother was named Peter, and Peter's son was named Lawrence Ashawak, and Lawrence was still alive when this research started, and so we connected with him, although he sadly passed away just a few months after that. But we were still able to connect with him and his family and get started on this work.
Okay, and her remains were repatriated, is that right?
Yeah. So in 2022, we were able to work with the family and with the Army to disinter her remains and have her returned to Kodiak Island. So I traveled to Carlisle, Pennsylvania with family members as well as a local Orthodox priest, and together we all went, and I was just there to support in any way that I could, although it was mostly up to the family to oversee everything. But if they needed any support, I was there to be there. And and that was July of 2022. And then we escorted her back to Kodiak, and we held a ceremony here in Kodiak town. There was a ceremony at the Orthodox Church in the morning, and then also a celebration here at the Alutiiq Museum. And then after that, they then escorted her remains to Old Harbor, and she was reburied next to her brother Peter there in Old Harbor.
Okay. And the other student, Parascovia, what did you guys learn about her, and what's in store for, I guess, her remains, which are still over at Carlisle?
Yeah, they are. So with Parascovia, we had a few more hurdles that we ran into as we were doing genealogical research on her. As I mentioned, many of these students were orphans when they were brought over, and that was the case for Parascovia. And one of the things that made it really difficult to identify exactly who her relatives are today was that she had multiple different last names that were recorded at the Carlisle School and in vital statistics and in the census as well. So in her student record, her last name was originally written down as Achacee, and we weren't exactly sure on how that was going to be pronounced, if it was Akasi or Chucky, or we just didn't know. And the spellings, of course, weren't standardized for native names back then. So we didn't know how it might be written down elsewhere. But that name was actually crossed out on her student record and replaced with the name Feodoth. And then when you look at other records at the school, there's other variations of that. There's Feodorov and Friendov and Teodov. And so even just trying to trace any of those last names was kind of difficult. But we also had looked, at Charles Bennell's journal with the help of a local researcher, and saw that Bennell, this is the man who escorted these 11 students to Carlisle in 1901, had written in his journal that he was in the year 1900, traveling to Long Island to meet with Parascovia to see if she was interested in going to Carlisle. And so when we look at the 1900 census, there is a Parascovia living on Long Island who was of the right age, living with a family there. And her last name in the census was Azawarwak. And so we had all of these different last names to research. And so we worked with the Russian Orthodox Seminary. There's a researcher there who is an expert in Russian, and specifically like older Russian. And so we worked with her. Her name is Daria, to look at vital statistics records from that time period, and identified a couple of different girls named Periscovia born in the right time frame. Of course, none of which had any of those last names, but we were able to identify Periscovia Abayukak, who was born in 1886, as the Periscovia who went to Carlisle based on her family and her godparents, and tracing threads in all of those places.
Wow.
And so with her, after identifying which Periscovia was the one that we should be researching, we were able to eventually identify living relatives. And so by late 2024, I want to say, we made contact with who we believe is the oldest living relative of Periscovia. And but they don't live in Alaska like Anastasia's family still did. They lived down in the lower 48, and so we didn't have any like prior familiarity like between us as an institution or even as a community and the family today. And so it was just kind of difficult to make strong connections and convey this information about Periscovia to them. And so by the time our funding expired at the end of 2025, we just weren't able to make enough movement happen to have them fill out the necessary paperwork and take the time it takes to make all of that happen, which is quite a lift. And so we did share all of our research and information with the Army in hopes that they would be able to continue working with the family. And so we are hopeful because the Army has been very supportive in this work, and we're hoping as well that they can make movements on getting Periscovia home.
All right.
And so we are hopeful that that work will continue, and we're going to continue advocating for that, even though the funding for this specific project has expired.
Right. All right, we're going to go to a break in just a moment here, but we'll continue with Derek Shaya from the Alutiiq Museum and talk more about this exhibition called From Kodiak to Carlisle, Tracing Our Lost Students. If you want to join our conversation, give us a call at 1-800-996-2848. Residents in rural parts of the country are eyeing troubling trends for both healthcare and housing following a year of major federal funding and staffing cuts. We'll discuss the most recent outlook for some of the most basic services and what tribes and those who depend on them are doing to prepare. That's all on the next Native America Calling.
Who protects Indian country? Amerind does. As the only 100% tribally owned insurance carrier, Amerind helps strengthen tribal communities by providing reliable insurance coverage and keeping dollars in Indian country. From property and liability to commercial auto and tribal workers' compensation, Amerind is here to protect what matters. Celebrating 40 years of serving Indian country. Learn more at amerind.com. That's AMERIND.com.
Thank you for listening to Native America Calling. I'm Andy Murphy, and we're talking about the ongoing efforts to document and tell the story of Indian boarding schools through the eyes of students. You can join our conversation by calling 1-800-996-2848. That's also 1-800-99-NATIVE. I want to bring back Derek Shaya, Director of Living Culture and Language over at the Alutiiq Museum and Archaeological Repository. Derek, the exhibition is titled From Kodiak to Carlisle, Tracing Our Lost Students. We know two of those students died and were buried at Carlisle. We just spoke about them just before the break here. But is there a story about any of the other students that stands out to you?
Yeah, so this exhibit is really cool because while our research for these almost 5 years focused on these two girls, Anastasia and Periscovia, We, of course, did learn a little bit about these other students who were brought there in 1901 as well, just as, we were trying to find out anything we could. And one of the stories that sticks out to me is that one of the boys' names was Nikifor Showchuk, and we learned that he had, of all of these 11 students, the most information was out there about him because he played for the Carlisle football team. And so he actually played alongside Jim Thorpe and met, I think it was President Roosevelt after playing a game against Harvard and stuff like that. So he was fairly well known among followers of the Carlisle football team then. And there's news articles about him being the only, quote, Eskimo person to play football. These are, of course, articles written in early 1900s and stuff like that. So that's probably, of all the students, the story that stands out.
Okay. For listeners who are curious, we have a photo of these 11 students on our website, nativeamericacalling.com. It's in the post about today's show. So if you'd like to see a picture of these students and learn where you can find out more about the exhibit, you can go to our website. Derek, for those who aren't lucky enough to visit Kodiak to see the exhibit firsthand, what will visitors to the museum see when they do visit?
Yeah, so coming in, so this exhibit from Kodiak to Carlisle is in what we call our Living Culture Gallery. And this is a part of our gallery that is free for any visitor. It's not, you don't have to pay admission to come see it. So this is where we keep our rotating exhibits. And so this one just went up last Friday and will be on display for about 8 months or so. And so when they come into that section, they'll first learn a little bit of background about the Carlisle Indian School and then also just a little bit about Charles Bennell, who escorted them there. And then first they'll learn about the lives of the two girls who most of our research focus on. That again is Anastasia Ashawak and Periscovia Abayukuk, and go over what their lives were like. That we talk a little bit about the outings that they went on, and these outings were things that almost all students at Carlisle went on, as far as I know, to go work for local businesses or help in family households in the area. So yeah, we talk about that, and then their lives before Carlisle as well. But then on the other side of, so it's a relatively small area where you have one wall that talks about those things. On the other wall is where we talk about the other students who were on that same journey in 1901, including Nikifor, the football player. And then the other students' names are Michael Chabitnoy, John Lolchesnikov, Shashka Alexander, Peter Dobrovolsky, Kate Shepard, Orleana Yakov, Theodore Shelikov, and George Galaktinov. And so we have a little bit of information about all of those students as well. There's, as you can imagine, varying levels of information that is still around about those students, depending on what they were doing with their lives. And then we end that exhibit with talking about, how boarding schools have affected our people, and some of the lasting effects that boarding schools have had on our communities, but end on an upbeat note that even though our people have gone through some really trying times in boarding schools and otherwise throughout the 18 and 1900s, that we're still here and we're still proud to be Native people, to be who we are and practice our traditions and everything like that.
All right. All right. Thank you so much, Derek. I'm going to bring in our two more guests here. We have Nishay Andrew joining us from New Jersey. She's an Indigenous research specialist with the Alaska Native Heritage Center, and she's Yupik and Inupiaq. Welcome back to Native America Calling, Nishay.
Waka, hello. Thank you.
And joining us from Anchorage, Alaska is Benjamin Jasek. He's the Director of Indigenous Research at the Alaska Native Heritage Center. He's Denina Dene and Sukbiak. Welcome back to Native America Calling, Benjamin.
Hey, Yakachi too. Thanks for having us.
Of course. The Heritage Center is also working to repatriate relatives from Carlisle. Benjamin, tell us how this process started.
Yeah, thank you very much. So in 2022, the Alaska Native Heritage Center created a research department where we first started focusing really on boarding schools. Because one thing that was very apparent was there wasn't as much information about boarding schools in Alaska. And that was something that I had been working on for about a decade prior in terms of gathering information. But one aspect of our work has been to digitize ecclesial or church records throughout this that have to do with Alaska. And one thing that started popping up a lot was records pertaining to children who were brought from Alaska over to Carlisle. And so we started collecting this information, and just because we knew that it was going to be very important, well, not specifically connected to any one project, we started collecting all of it. And in about 2024, we were contacted by the Army to start potentially doing research on the other children who passed away from Alaska at Carlisle, making the total about 14 children. And so right off the bat, in our conversations, we started to realize that, together, that while a lot of the federal records, or Carlisle records, were either inaccurate or didn't have enough information or was missing a lot of information, a lot of the church records, mainly the Presbyterian records, became very helpful and needed in terms of trying to identify the families and even the location that a lot of these 14 children from Alaska who died at Carlisle were actually from, and so that really was where a lot of our research started within this project.
All right, and that's going to culminate in actual repatriation of remains, right?
That is correct. As of September of this year, there will be 4 children from Alaska being brought back from Carlisle back to their villages.
Okay. So obviously a lot of research goes into identifying students and their living family members. What is the balance between the documentation and research part and then respecting the needs of living family members?
Of course. I mean, a big part of why we do it, repatriation, bring back our ancestors, our families, is, for healing to occur, for our peoples. And so in doing research, we may get to the point of identifying an individual, but absolutely respecting the wishes of those the living family members who may not have even known that their own family had been taken over to Carlisle. And so really respect for our peoples, our ancestors, our families, is the first priority that we have in doing this research.
Right. I'm going to go to Nishay here. Nishay, you're working with Benjamin, and you started zeroing in on one particular student. Her name was Tumaysuk. Tell me about her and your connections to her.
Yes, definitely. So, in embarking on this research and looking at the many historical records that Ben has mentioned, that are in, our access at the Alaska Native Heritage Center, there was one photo of Tumaysuk that really stuck out to me. And it stuck out to me because she had tavukun, which is chin tattoos that are traditional to Inupiaq people in Alaska. And I've seen photos of these historical chin tattoos in some boarding school photos, but none that struck me quite as important as this one, because it looked like a spitting image of my great-great-grandmother's Mary Evasuk's chin tattoo. And that's what really, clued me in on focusing on Tumaysuk. And it was through those chin tattoos we were able to confirm that Tumaysuk is a relative of mine. And there's something to be said about this research being led by Indigenous people themselves, having the context, the cultural knowledge to identify a tattoo like that and piece together these family stories through photographs and how it becomes possible that way. So Tumaysuk was brought to Carlisl in 1897 through the U.S. Cutter Bear, which was a very large boat used for transportation of reindeer in early Alaska. She was brought with a group of 5 other students from the Teller Reindeer Station all the way to Carlisle. And Tumaysuk is just one of those 6 students who were brought to Carlisle by Sheldon Jackson at that time. And through the research that the Alaska Native Heritage Center has been working on for the past few years, I was able to confirm that Tumaysuk is my relative, and I was able to work with my mom and my other family members to bring about her return to Alaska this September.
That's a really awesome story, and I'm glad that worked out for you and your family, and it's really cool that it worked out that way with you doing this research here. How do you feel about being able to do this work now, being able to be, sort of that representative of your family and of Tumaysuk? In all of this research and all of this programming to bring relatives back to Alaska from Carlisle?
There are 2 ways that I can think of it. One way is, in embarking on the research of assimilative boarding schools, I never enter an archive expecting to see my own ancestors in that archive. So seeing that photo of Tumaysuk look like just a spitting image of my great-great-grandmother, that was incredibly special and really grounds me to this research and reminds me that we aren't researching something that's disconnected so greatly by time and space. It's really pretty close to us, which, leads me to this feeling where I am just so enamored with all of the work that's been done with the Alaska Native Heritage Center and also the Alutiiq Museum, as Derek was talking earlier, about being able to trace ancestry. I feel that being able to track ancestry is something that's largely inaccessible to many people who are currently living the legacies of assimilation, whatever that may be. But this is such a unique case in that there are people who remember what chin tattoos are. There are people who remember whose last name belonged to who in the community. And that combined with the historical records and maximizing both of these types of methodologies to bring back our ancestors back home is so invigorating and so exciting, and it's something I definitely don't take for granted. I am so honored to be representing my family and welcoming Tumesuk home, but even more so, I am so humbled and honored that Tumesuk and I were able to cross paths at this time, even though she passed away over 100 years ago.
Benjamin, Nishé's talking about the traditional tattoos that helped identify Tumesuk. Before we go to break here, I just want to ask about traditional tattoos. Are they an official sort of like record of identification?
That's a great question. So one thing, and that was a discussion that we had with the Army, is what is really a primary source material or a written primary source? And with chin tattoos, in this instance, one thing that, me, Nishé, and I talked about was, what is the purpose in this instance of a chin tattoo? Coming down to the conclusion that it's something, after talking with elders and looking at other source material from that time, that it shows the matriarchal line. And even though it isn't technically written on paper, it still is a written primary source material that shows.
All right. Sorry about that, Benjamin. We'll be back right after this break. I want to hear more about those tattoos.
Support for law and justice-related programming provided by Hobbs, Strauss, Dean & Walker, LLP, a national law firm dedicated to promoting and defending tribal rights for over 40 years. More information available at hobbsstrauss.com.
Kaufman & Associates has over 35 years of experience serving Indian country, supporting growth, transformation, and sustainability of tribal programs. More at kaufmaninc.com, KAUFFMANINC.com.
You've got it tuned to Native America Calling. I'm Andy Murphy, and we're talking about the process of researching and documenting the stories of Indian boarding schools. What is being done where you are? Join our conversation by calling 1-800-996-2848. That's also 1-800-99-NATIVE. Before I go to a caller we have on the line, Benjamin, I want to give you a chance to finish what you were saying about those tattoos and them being considered an identifier for not only you guys as researchers, but for folks in the Army who you guys had to work with students who were at Carlisle Indian boarding school.
To connect. So another point within the chin tattoos that's really amazing is that that me and Nishé have talked about quite a bit is that the way that film is actually developed, it will determine, especially at that time, whether or not the ink actually shows up. And so if you look at old Maori photos, where they're developed a certain way, you won't see a drop of ink on their face. And so we're really fortunate to be able to actually see this. With Tumesuk, one issue, just as Derek stated, just as Nishé stated, was the lack of records. She did not have a last name that was recorded or at least given to her at that point. No census records. And so in talking So in terms of using that kind of primary source material, along with her name being misspelled several times, just as within Derek's experience, really that became the tattoos became a thing that we really started to recognize that and explain that, our forms of communicating and writing, our traditional forms, are just as important and tell even more than what we could find from written records. Okay. And from working with the Army, it was concluded that this, in fact, is a amazing way for identifying children.
All right. I want to go to our caller we have in Pine Ridge, South Dakota, listening to Keeley. We have Regina. Go ahead, Regina.
Okay, my father, his name is Milton Brave. He went to school at Carlisle. He and his little brother went. His little brother's name is Lester. And in this instance, my grandpa, my dad's dad, went with his children, 2 sons, to Carlisle. So when Lester died at Carlisle, my dad came back with his dad in the body. Uncle Lester is buried over here. But I was listening to that. They took pictures of the students when they first came in. And my dad, I had 2 pictures of him from Carlisle. He was dressed in his traditional clothes. He had 3 holes in one of his ears, and that's traditional. And he had his braids on. And the next picture was he was dressed in an army uniform, or maybe it wasn't army or whatever, but it was a uniform, and his hair was cut and stuff. And so I don't know how long he was there, but he told me stories about him meeting. That Jim Thorpe. We used to watch him play football and stuff like that.
Okay.
And other stuff. And he even sang the Carlisle song. They had a song there. But I didn't ask him how long he and his brother were there, and their dad, before Lester died. So one of the things I was thinking about for all the people that are finding their people and bringing the bones back was, is it possible for them to go through the bones? And I know the scientists can do that, mm-hmm. and see what they died from.
Okay.
So that's why I called.
All right. Thank you so much, Regina. I want to go over to our guest we have now from Denver, Colorado. We have Philip Gover III. He is the Senior Director of Tribal and Indigenous Engagement for History Colorado. He's Pawnee and Choctaw. Welcome to Native America Calling, Philip.
No, I'm glad to be on. Thank you for including me.
Yeah, so you're looking into the Teller Indian Boarding School, which is now the Teller Institute. Tell me a little bit about its history and what kind of research that's been done so far in tracking down a cemetery at its location there in Colorado.
Yes, I'm actually working on the entirety of boarding schools within Colorado, and it's under a state legislation, Colorado House Bill 241444, and it was a continuation of work that started under Colorado legislation HB 221327. And one of the locations we are definitely looking at, which was one of the off-reservation schools, was the Grand Junction Indian School, also known as the Teller Institute. And the work that we're doing over there is we're still trying to determine where the location of a cemetery was, and it's not clear if it was on the school space itself, which was about 200 acres, or is it somewhere else within the town and has changed. So we are currently in a process where we're working through tribal consultation with the tribes that were connected to the school, to memorialize the students that were lost there, but also attended. And through that process, beyond just the tribal consultation, with about 34 tribes, and that is dependent on as we find more archival documents, because we had so many damaged documents that come from Grand Junction Indian School era. The school is in I guess, running from 1886 to 1911. A lot of those documents, just in at least what we found in the National Archives in D.C. and here in Broomfield, actually Colorado is one of the other locations, were damaged or just really weren't complete records. We couldn't find a document other than to state we know some children are lost at these locations. It states that they were placed in the school cemetery. However, in those documents that are kind of legible at this point from what we've seen, we don't have a direct location. And so we are doing ground penetrating radar work, which was within regional center space, which was actually that sits right on top of where the school buildings were. We did not make a determination through that work as to a direct location in a physical sense. So we're kind of moving around and along that southern border of where the school was to try to determine that next location. We're working with the Department of Military and Veterans Association for Colorado, which has a veterans cemetery in the space that's directly east of the school buildings. Through support of the State Historic Fund, we're going to be doing some ground penetrating radar in a location there that hasn't been developed, and maybe that next possible location. But we're doing several different layers beyond the looking for the cemetery. We're also conducting oral history throughout the state to make recommendations to the state legislature, the Department of Education, and higher education as to that connection from these historical damage that's done within our Native families to what's the modern context of how legislation and possible recommendations for the state on how to help support and hopefully move forward. And it's kind of been quite a bit of work. We'll be in consultation with the Southern Ute and Ute Mountain tribes also. And we've made connections to as many tribes as we can, and we continue to for this next year.
Okay. What is the I guess the end goal here? Are we looking to repatriate remains, or just make sure that we have the record right?
Yeah, it will depend. Since we don't have an archival record of the location of the cemetery, once we do determine it, we'll be consulting with the tribes on how they would like to proceed based on the knowledge that we have. At Fort Lewis Indian School, which is another of the off-reservation schools here in Colorado, we know the location of the actual cemetery. What we don't have record is who's buried in what place. And also even the work that was done there, they found a number of additional burials that the state was unaware of. So it may have been a pauper cemetery at one point, and people were just placing their ancestors and their relatives, knowing that was a protected space. So I guess the ultimate goal would be at least to determine a location of this possible cemetery. First, protect the site so that it's always known to be protected, and then based on the knowledge that we may have at that point, and in consultation with the tribes, hopefully. For those tribes, we can determine the location of direct ancestors so that we could return them for those cultures and those peoples that want return, but mainly just to also protect and memorialize properly for those that were lost in the schools.
Okay. And so now you're reaching out for information from the public. What information do you hope to find?
Yeah, we are doing community listening sessions throughout the state. One, to talk with those families who come through boarding schools, so we can at least create recommendations in terms of those connections of the families and what does that look like, and what is it that the Native community needs here in Colorado in order to move forward. We are also talking to a lot of the non-Native families over in the Grand Junction area just to try to determine what is that common knowledge that occurs within the location itself. And the people who often built the schools weren't the students themselves. They did create certain aspects, but there was definite connections into the non-Native communities there. And we may be able to at least help triangulate into a location of where to further look with the kind of modern GPR work. That's kind of the request. We're going to be going out to Grand Junction on April 21st to ask for that help and support, just to see what common knowledge is within the local community. But we're also constantly in contact with those members. Since the schools at Grand Junction and Fort Lewis, the last time they were operational was 1911. It's more of the memorialization aspect, and those tribes aren't located. Many of the tribal members who attended those schools aren't located in the state of Colorado. There's some Ute students who did attend, and we'll be having those direct consultations. But really, in the public, we're looking for also those oral histories. And for us, we, according to legislation, they're going to have to be confidential, and it's really to give statement towards what this effect looks like of the boarding schools directly into the families currently. So we'll be really in the public for those who would like to talk towards their connection to the oral history of the boarding schools, to take those oral histories to get an understanding of what that looks like in the family. But for the general public is also, if there's knowledge within the community, any community member, to somebody at one point being pointed out, hey, this is where that cemetery is. We're not finding an archival record that was kept by the federal government, and unfortunately also the state itself, when they received the land, didn't do, at least from what we see through the state record, a good job of determining where that cemetery was and making sure it was protected. So the legacy of boarding schools is not always that positive, and I think all of us in the community are aware.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. How can folks get a hold of you if they might have information to share with you?
Yeah, we have on our website for History Colorado, there's a couple of drop downs, but if you put in American Indian Research Program, you can get to our main website. And on there, we have two buttons. One of them being oral history. I would ask that if you have information, would like to reach out, click on the oral history. We'll be contacting who we get those requests from, talk with them on how to proceed. For those who are Native families, we also want to come in a form of healing, where we would ask that whether or not you would like someone who's a health clinician or a traditional person in your local community be there. We would come and discuss that history with you and those direct connections, or even if you're a descendant, we would love to talk with you of those who to get an idea of the family structure and be able to make good recommendations. But also, if you're non-Native and know and have some connection into the boarding school location, especially the Grand Junction Indian School, also known as the Teller Institute, we would love to talk with you just to get an idea of what it is that your family may know of the location and placement of buildings and connections in that community, so we can understand the Grand Junction Indian School better.
All right. All right. And of course, you can find information on our guests we had today on our website, nativeamericacalling.com. And that is all the time we have for our conversation today. I'd like to say thank you to the guests we had on our show. We had Derek Shaya from the Alutiiq Museum and Archaeological Repository, Benjamin Jasek and Nishay Andrew from the Alaska Native Heritage Center, and Philip Gover III from History Colorado. Join us tomorrow for a conversation about potential challenges ahead for healthcare and housing in rural America. I'm Andy Murphy.
Support from Davis Keelan Law Firm, a New Mexico firm standing with Native families suffering catastrophic loss. When tragedy strikes Indian country, Davis Keelan fights to restore stability, dignity, and justice, bringing a voice to Native families and communities for 20 years. More information, daviskeelan.com.
Support from Rodale, publisher of A Feather and a Fork, 125 Intertribal Dishes from an Indigenous Food Warrior by Crystal Wapipa with Amy Page Condon, and a foreword by Tommy Orange is now available for purchase wherever books are sold. Every family caregiver could use help finding the necessary resources to care for their loved one. The AARP Family Caregiver Resource Guide helps family caregivers access key programs, services, and agencies in their communities. A copy of the guide is available by calling 877-333-5885 or online at aarp.org/caregiver-resources. AARP supports this show.
Native America Calling is produced in the Annenberg National Native Voice Studios in Albuquerque, New Mexico by Koahnic Broadcast Corporation, a Native nonprofit media organization. Funding is provided by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting with support from the Public Radio Satellite Service. Music is by Brent Michael Davids. Native Voice One, the Native American Radio Network.